For the past 7 years now, the SFC, or Software Freedom Conservancy, has been going to war with TV manufacturer Vizio with a lawsuit that's been going on for the past couple of years over what they claim to be violations of the GPL, notably GPL v2 and LGPL v2.1. And recently there was a partial ruling on this lawsuit, and some people like Linus Torvalds had some, words to say about it. But firstly, let's step back just a bit and explain what is actually happening here. Why is there a lawsuit? What actually caused the issue? From an article from the Register back in 2021, Software Freedom Conservancy sues TV maker Vizio for GPL infringement. The lawsuit alleges that Vizio's TV products using a system called SmartCast contain software that Vizio unfairly appropriated from a community of developers who intended consumers to have specific rights to modify, improve, share, and reinstall modified versions of the software. The GPL is a copyleft license, the terms of which say that each time you redistribute the program or any work based on the program, the recipient automatically receives a license from the original licenser to copy, distribute, or modify the program subject to these terms and conditions. The terms apply not only to the original GPL code used, but to any code derived from it. Vizio describes SmartCast as the platform that powers every new Vizio TV, instantly access endless blah blah blah. I don't care about this, it's marketing bullshit. Now, over on the SFC's page about the lawsuit, there is this section right here containing basically all of the resources you might want to see to keep track of the entire lawsuit. Now, obviously, a lot of this is not going to be super relevant right now, but if you want the entire history, be sure to go and check out all of this. I'll leave it linked down below. Now jumping over to a more recent piece from the Register because I think it phrases things a little bit better. The SFC initially asked Vizio to publish its SmartCast source code back in August 2018, based on its claim the software relies on various applications and libraries that are licensed under the GPL v2 and LGPL v2.1, including the Linux kernel, also utils, GNU Bash, GNU Awk, BlueES, BusyBox, and other components. Vizio responded in 2019, but the code it provided was incomplete, according to the SFC, and didn't fulfill the company's obligations. After 2 more years of negotiation, the SFC sued Vizio in October of 2021, a relatively uncommon event in the FOSS world due to the cost and difficulty of enforcing open source licenses. Now, jumping ahead quite a bit, back on the 4th of December 2025, there was a tentative ruling on the case, and this is what the SFC had to say. The tentative ruling issued this morning rules in favor of the SFC that Vizio has a duty to provide the SFC with the complete and corresponding copylefted source code to the TV it purchased. Tentative rulings are not final, they are issued by the court to indicate how the judge is leaning on the issue, so the oral arguments of the hearing are most effective. The tentative ruling grants the SSC's motion on the issue that the direct contract was made between the SSC and Vizio when SSC system administrator Paul Vischer requested the source code to a TV that the SFC had purchased. This contract obligated Vizio to provide SSC the complete and corresponding source code. Other alternative grounds for this duty arising were also raised by the FCC in its filing seeking to recognize the SSC as a third-party beneficiary. These were tentatively rejected by the court, primarily on procedural grounds. Back when this happened, it got a bit of media coverage. From the Register, judge hints Vizio TV buyers may have rights to source code license under GPL, and Phosphorus, judge signals win for Software Freedom Conservancy in Vizio GPL case. Again, this was a tentative ruling, and things could change after the fact. So, Karen Sandler, executive director of the SFC, told the Register in an email that the hearing went well, though Vizio's legal counsel stridently disagreed. Yeah, I can imagine why they would disagree with the legal analysis in the tentative ruling. Judge Leal said she'll take the matter under submission, which means she'll think about it further. After the court went off the record, Leal's clerk specifically verified the court reporter could provide an expedited transcript, so Leal could likely review the hearing transcript soon. Also, Bradley M. Kuhn, policy fellow at the SFC, had something to say as well, and of course, being involved in the SFC, he was quite positive about this tentative ruling. SFC lawyers argue correctly that the judge got it right in the tentative ruling. The contract we accept and we exercise the new offer when Vizio updated their offer during the case. Vizio's lawyer dubiously claims that because we said the offer was invalid when the case started, means we can never test the offer for source later when they fixed it during the case. Effectively, Vizio is effectively... Jesus Christ, why does he write like... Effectively, Vizio is effectively saying, if you're in a GPL lawsuit, you lose your right to even ask for source at all, which obviously is not how that works. Now, more recently, on the 23rd, there was a partial ruling by Judge Leal on what the SFC says is a position that they do not actually hold. Specifically, Vizio said in their motion for summary adjudication, Defendant Vizio Inc. moves this court for summary adjudication whether GPL v2 and LGPL v2.1 require the licensee under the GPL agreement to provide information necessary to install modified versions of the licensed software back onto the smart TVs with which the software was originally distributed while ensuring the TVs continue to function properly. Vizio moves on the ground that the plain language compels the conclusion that neither license imposes a duty on licensees to provide all information necessary to permit reinstallation of modified software back on the same device such that the device continues to function properly. The SFC has never held the position, nor do we hold the position, that any version of the GPL require that the device continues to function properly after a user installs their modified version of the copyleft components. Indeed, as was seen with Tivo, it is completely sufficient to provide the user a mechanism to install a new firmware that removes not only all of the proprietary components, such as Vizio's or Tivo's TV application, but also other material that is an independent and separate work from the copylefted software. This may include, for example, removing keys used to decode encrypted video content with the underlying hardware. The GPL agreements promise the user's right to a functioning Linux-based system with any other copylefted components. Unfortunately, Vizio's motion is likely to confuse the public. No reasonable consumer or copyleft activist has ever asked for this, nor expects it. GPL v3 itself even allows, under certain conditions, for the OEM vendor to cause the accompanying user-space proprietary software to cease to function. We frankly don't know where Vizio got the language for their motion. For years, we have asked Vizio for the complete corresponding source code for all GPL and LGPL components on their devices so we can keep these devices out of landfill, repurpose them for new applications, and otherwise exercise our software right to repair as consumers. We and all consumers have expected this with every piece of hardware that we all have purchased since the inception of copylefted operating systems. Vizio's position here is even what we would expect with a laptop. If we buy a Microsoft Windows laptop and install a Linux-based system, we wouldn't expect the Microsoft Word application to necessarily continue to function. Obviously, you can wind things, but that's not the point. Similarly, we don't expect Vizio's proprietary TV software to function when we exercise our right to software repair. Litigation is complicated and nuanced decisions by the court are often exaggerated by third parties with a political and/or policy agenda. We will continue to advocate in this case and elsewhere that users and consumers are owed the installation scripts that were used to install the GPL v2 and LGPL v2.1 software. We do expect those who favor corporate profit over users' rights to publicly claim this ruling reaches further and means more than it says. Now, I don't think that is the direction that Torvalds is coming at this from, but Torvalds does have some words to say about this partial ruling. In what is a very rare Linus Torvalds social media post, I think the last one before this was maybe a year ago. The reason I want to post about it, that being the partial ruling, is that it basically validates my long-held beliefs that the GPL v2 is about making source code available, not controlling the access to the hardware that it runs on. The court case itself is a mess of two bad parties, Vizio and the SFC. Both of them look horribly bad in court for different reasons. Vizio used Linux in their TVs without originally making the source code available, and that was obviously not okay. And the Software Freedom Conservancy then tries to make the argument that a license forces you to make the installation keys, etc. available even though that is not the case, and the reason why the kernel is very much GPL v2 only. Linus, if you don't know, is very not in favor of GPL v3 changes, and the reason why he never wanted to change the kernel from GPL v2. The people involved know that very well, but have argued otherwise in court. End result, both parties have acted badly, but at least Vizio did fix their behavior, even if it apparently took this lawsuit to do so. I can't say the same about the SFC. Please, SFC, stop using the kernel for your bogus legal arguments where you try to expand the GPL v2 to be something it isn't. You look like a bunch of incompetent assholes. Basically, Linus doesn't agree this lawsuit should be happening in the first place, and a big part of the reason why he chose the GPL v2 is he wanted to make source code available, but he didn't want to make it difficult to build hardware making use of this software. Doing things with GPL v3 is going to give more control to the users, but that's not something he necessarily wanted. He wanted it to be easy to build things with this software. The only party that looks competent here is the judge, which in this ruling says, plaintiff contends the phrases machine readable and scripts used to control compilation and installation support their assertion in response to special interrogatory number 4 that defendant should deliver files such that a person of ordinary skill can compile the source code into a functional executable and install it on the same device, such that all features of the original program are retained without undue difficulty. The language of the agreement is unambiguous. It does not impose the duty, which is the subject of this motion. Read as a whole, the agreements require Vizio to make the source code available in such a manner the source code can be readily obtained and modified by plaintiff or other third parties, while source code is defined to include the scripts used to control compilation and installation. This does not mean that Vizio must allow users to reinstall the software, modified or otherwise, back onto the smart TVs. So you should be able to compile the software and modify the software, but the judge doesn't agree that you should be able to reinstall it onto the TV, specifically in a manner that preserves all features of the original program and or ensures the smart TV continues to function properly. Rather, in the context of the agreements, the disputed language means that Vizio must provide the source code in a manner that allows the source code to be obtained and revised by plaintiff or others for use in other applications. In other words, Vizio must ensure the ability of users to copy, change, modify, and distribute the source code, including using the code in other free programs consistent with the preamble and terms and conditions of the agreements. However, nothing in the language of the agreements require Vizio to allow modified source code to be reinstalled onto its devices while ensuring the devices remain operable after the source code is modified. If this was the intent of the agreements could have been readily modified to state that users must be permitted to modify and reinstall modified software on products which use the program while ensuring the products continue to function. The absence of such language is dispositive, and there is no basis to find that such a term was implied here, therefore the motion is granted. This makes that clear. Yes, you have to make the source code available, but no, the GPL v2 does not in any way force you to then open up your hardware. My intention and the GPL v2 is clear. The kernel copyright license covers the software and does not extend to the hardware it runs on, the same way the kernel copyright license does not extend to user-space programs that run on it. In direct response to Linus Torvalds, once again, Karen Sandler of the SFC has something to say. Happy holidays. One Floss social post doesn't have the space to discuss all the inaccuracies in your post. This lawsuit isn't primarily about Linux, which is just one of 26 copyleft projects on the TVs. There's both GPL v2 and LGPL v2.1 binaries. Vizio sources remain non-compliant on various issues. I think maybe you didn't read what we've actually said. And in a reply to someone else, linking to the post I showed you a little bit earlier. In reply to someone else, Linus says, I wonder why you think I'm ignoring or misreading what the SFC has written and stated, because I'm sadly very familiar with their statements over the years. Do you think the California Superior Court judge also misread what the SFC stated, because that judge also found their arguments lacking any basis in reality? I think you didn't actually read the ruling, and you may perhaps just read the flim-flam garbage that the SFC put out about the completely irrelevant issue of continuing to function properly, which was what Vizio was using as their reason for not releasing keys. Put another way, I can read. That Superior Court judge can read. I think you need to learn to read, and you need to take what the SFC then says in court and on their blog with a big pinch of salt. I realize that other people like the GPL v3 and wish the Linux kernel was under that license, but that is simply not the case and never has been and never will. Deal with reality, not your baseless wishes otherwise. In response to Linus's original post, Keys Cook says this: the continue to function properly language came from Vizio though. That's not a claim SFC ever made. That wouldn't even be covered by GPL v3. From Nilgumpa, yeah, I don't think I've ever seen SFC make the claim that it forces hardware to be opened up. To the contrary, they've argued that people have fundamentally misunderstood what Tivo did, and it resulted in the messy GNU v3 license stuff we have today, and then linking over to this post about Tivoization. Before we get to that, basically what is happening here is there is a big mess about what the lawsuit is even kind of about, what the SFC is trying to even do here, and nobody even agrees what's actually happening. Tivoization and your right to install under copyleft and GPL, written in 2021 by Bradley M. Kun. We're not going to read all of this because there is a lot being said here. I'll leave the entire thing linked down below, so we'll focus on one particular part: understanding the Tivoization rhetoric. So what did Tivo do that was so objectionable? What was the behavior that Stallman went to work drafting GPL v3 to prevent that Tivo was allowed to do under GPL v2? It's not, as others widely misreport, that Tivo forbade reinstallation of the GPL software itself. To my knowledge, Tivo never prevented such reinstallation. No one involved, including me, Stallman, Tivo, or anyone at the FSF at the time, believed that the GPL v2 permitted Tivo to withhold the installation information for the GPL software itself. FSF demanded that Tivo provided its users the ability to reinstall Linux and other GPL software such as GNU Bash. What Tivo later did, which some software freedom activists, including Stallman, found objectionable, was that Tivo designed the reinstallation process of that GPL v2 software to cause the proprietary Tivo application to cease to function. I recall this being widely discussed when Tivo Series 3 was released in mid-2006, and my understanding was that all Series 3 devices had this particular anti-feature. In other words, if you decided to modify your copy of Linux for the Tivo device and reinstall Linux, the Tivo user space application would realize that cryptographic lockdown had been breached and that proprietary software would no longer function. By exercising your reinstallation rights under GPL v2, you turn your Tivo DVR into a standalone server with some video processing equipment attached. You could use Kodi, which had a different name at the time, I believe it was XBMC at the time, to turn that former Tivo into a FOSS DVR, but your ability to use the proprietary DVR software from Tivo was lost, likely permanently. Most have of course heard of the negative term Tivoization that Richard Stallman popularized during the GPL v3 process, which was contemporaneous with the release of the Tivo Series 3. I nevertheless asked Stallman to not use that term, both then and many times since. I still disagree with Stallman's policy position on the narrow issue of preserving proprietary user space functionality. Specifically, I just don't think it matters. If upon upgrading your copyleft software that the proprietary software that was, to use GPL v2's terminology, merely aggregated, alongside the copylefted software continue to function, I felt and still feel that it's actually better policy to break the merely aggregated proprietary software as GPL v2 permits. My policy view is that this breakage inspires and encourages users to install a FOSS alternative for the user space applications after they've reinstalled the FOSS operating system. Nevertheless, Stallman found this practice using crypto lockdown to force proprietary software to fail illegitimate. He noted publicly that GPL v2 didn't prevent this behavior and wanted and wrote, as explained below, a GPL v3 draft that prohibited that behavior. So basically, the SFC stance was never that reinstalling the software shouldn't break the proprietary software on the system, because that's not what GPL v2 ever specified in the license. To this day, I'll remain frustrated that many pro-GPL v3 advocates during the GPL v3 drafting process saw fit to imply ideas that they had no basis to believe were true about GPL v2. We all knew long before GPL v3 drafting began that there was a clear installation requirement in GPL v2. The word install appears prominently. The training materials that I developed for FSF described above were vetted through Stallman and the FSF's legal counsel before using them to teach CLE classes. If anyone received a different impression, it was surely a miscommunication due to the aggressive GPL v3 is much better rhetoric of the time. Meanwhile, much of the debate about cryptographic lockdown under GPL centered around the question of disclosure of specific authorization keys. It was said, probably correctly, that GPL v2 did not mandate the disclosure of any specific authorization key. What was often left unsaid, apparently in an effort to make GPL v2 seem weaker than it actually was that GPL v2 did still require a functional installation method without disclosure of authorization keys. For example, it would, in my personal opinion, be entirely compliant with the GPL v2 to simply disable the secure boot chain, providing no path back to the vendor-provided cryptographically signed firmware, and allow the user to reinstall only the GPL v2 components on the device, never to return to the stock vendor firmware. I suspect such restriction would be prohibited under GPL v3, since GPL v3 clearly requires not that you just give a viable installation path as GPL v2 does, but GPL v3 additionally requires disclosure of the authorization keys. Lawsuits are always going to be very, very messy, and this one is exactly the same. There is a lot of differing opinions about how things should go. Some people not understanding the stances that other people have, but you know, what do you expect after 7 years? So, let me know where you stand down below. If you've been following this lawsuit and have anything to say, I'd love to hear it. So, let me know in the comment section down below. If you liked the video, go like the video. Go subscribe as well. And if you really liked the video and you want to become one of these amazing people over here, check out the Patreon subscribers Daily Bearer Pay linked in the description down below. That's going to be it for me, and I want to know.